Well, I'll begin by introducing myself. My name's Brendan. I'm the Senior Minister here at Herald Anglican, and it's great to be joining together at our annual carol service. So thank you all for coming along. Thank you for wearing masks and socially distancing, and we're going to continue to try and socially distance over our supper as well. But we're going to be looking at this passage, and I want to begin with a story, if I can. It's of a news reporter who he's just been authorised to book a charter flight by his newspaper to go and get some footage of the bushfires that are ravaging his local area. And so he rings the local airport, and the guy at the airport says, look, there'll be a plane waiting for you on the runway when you arrive. And so he arrives at the local airport and he spots the plane warming up just outside one of the hangars. And so he jumps in, closes the door, takes the seat next to the pilot and says, let's go. And so the pilot taxis out and pulls the plane into the wind and takes off. And once they're in the air, the reporter says to the pilot, all right, head towards that smoke. We need to get some low-flying passes over the valley to get some photos of the fires. And the pilot looks at him and he goes, why? He says, because I'm a reporter with the ABC and I'm here to get some footage of the bushfires. And after a minute's silence, the pilot turns to me and goes, so let me get this straight. You're not my flying instructor? Now, I tell that story because what we're looking at tonight is a very, very famous sort of passage from the Bible that many of us misjudge. Right? So the story of the three wise men is very familiar to a lot of us, but our familiarity with this story can sometimes mean that we misread it. We misread what's actually going on here, just like those two guys, both those guys, in that aeroplane. Now, what I mean is, when people read this passage, our thoughts often turn to things like, that song, We Three Kings Who Travelled Afar, or the Star of Wonder, Star of Night, or just the gold, frankincense, or Frankenstein, depending on how old you are, and myrrh. But what I'd like us to see this evening is that while these things are good things, they're not the main message of this passage. Right? The main message of this passage is how people are to respond to King Jesus. Because you see, if the story of Christmas is true, okay, if God did send his son, who was from all eternity, to be born as a human baby into our world, then this changes everything. Right? There is not a single thing in all of existence that isn't affected by this. And here's the thing, something of this magnitude demands a response. And we see four responses in this passage that was just read for us earlier tonight. So we get two good responses and two bad responses. And these are the four things I'd like to talk with us about over the next 15 minutes or so. And so those responses are searching for the king, ignoring the king, rejecting the king, and worshipping the king. So they go good, bad, bad, good. And my prayer is that this passage will help us think a little bit more about how we respond to King Jesus this Christmas. So let's dive in. And our passage begins with these words. You may have it open in front of you, but I'm going to read it to us again anyway. This first verse, it starts like this. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. Now, three quick things about the three wise men. So to begin with, we actually have no idea how many Magi there really were. All right? Tradition says there was three because they bought three presents. But two people can bring three presents, can't they? As can 10. We actually don't know. Second, we can't be certain that they're all men. Some of them might have been women. We don't know. And thirdly, we actually have no idea what the term magi means. That word there in our Bibles is just a transliteration of the Greek word magoi. And so our best guess is that they were like the court magicians in some of those ancient Near Eastern places, kind of like what we see in the book of Daniel. And we get this from verse 2. So they asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and we've come to worship him. So these guys are astrologers. Now, astrologers, as opposed to astronomers, believe that the movements of the stars and the sun and the planets somehow affect life here on earth. And the Bible sees astrology as worthy of nothing more than ridicule. All right, Isaiah mocks the Babylonian astrologers in Isaiah 47, and the astrologers in Daniel chapter 2 turn out to be the fools of the story. So here's the thing. Why is it that these three, though not necessarily three, wise, though probably not wise, men, though perhaps not all men, how is it that they actually get it right? Right, their assessment that a new star in the sky means a new king has been born in Israel was actually on the money. And this actually opens up a whole can of worms. Like, firstly, where did the star come from? All right. And second, how did it guide them to Israel? And third, why would God reveal himself to people that the Bible elsewhere describes as fools? Well, the answer comes when we realise that God did not send his Son into the world to just save a privileged few, i.e. the Jews. All right? Jesus came to save people from all nations. And God put this special star in the sky because he knew these foreign astrologers would see it and interpret it as a new king being born and then go searching for that king. And friends, God still wants people searching for Jesus today as well. It doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how smart you are, doesn't matter what ethnic background you are, what gender you are, or what you've done in life, all right? God wants you searching for Jesus, all right? The first right response to Jesus in this passage is to search for him. And the way we search for Jesus is in the Bible. Now notice the star only got the Magi halfway there. They only got them to the general vicinity. As we learn down in verses 5 and 6, they actually have to consult the scriptures in order to find where that king was born. And so, the first response we see to Jesus in this passage is a right one, big tick, and that is to search for him in his word. The second response we see in this passage, not as good. So, the Magi turn up in Jerusalem. Now that's the obvious place that an Israelite king will be born, in the capital, okay? And like we've seen, they needed the scriptures to point them in the right direction, and we read this in verse 4. When Herod had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. Now, here's the thing. The Jewish people had been waiting for their Messiah for centuries. And these Magi turn up and inform all of Jerusalem that the Messiah has been born. And then the religious leaders tell everyone where the Messiah is. And then what happens? Nothing. No one throws a party. There's no celebrations. No one even travels the few miles down the road to Bethlehem to check if that might have been the case or not. All right, the people, along with their religious leaders, just ignore God's Messiah. Now, friends, if COVID has taught us nothing else, it is that a failure to acknowledge the seriousness of a situation can have catastrophic effects. So, although in January of 2020, the WHO declared COVID to be a global health emergency, right? That was in January 2020. Donald Trump then spent the whole of February 2020 downplaying the seriousness of the disease by telling Americans not to worry because the US government has it under control and it will all be over soon. Now, when you add that to tens of millions of Americans who refuse to wear a mask because, well, it encroaches on my freedoms, what ends up happening? Well, you have the most developed nation on the planet being ravaged worse than any other nation on the planet. But here's the thing, as serious as COVID is, it has nothing on Christmas. See, Christmas is where a being of infinite size and power. See, the Bible says that God fills the entire universe, and he created the entire universe out of nothing. It is a being of infinite size and infinite power entering into his creation as a human baby. And ignoring the seriousness of God taking on humanity is even more foolish than ignoring the seriousness of a global pandemic. All right, so the Jewish people and their leaders responded wrongly to Jesus by thinking he wasn't really worth the effort. But that's not the worst response in this passage. That honour goes to King Herod. Now, Herod, as we read, is an extraordinarily evil man. And I don't say that because he actually goes on to commit genocide in the second half of chapter 2. We didn't read that passage, but he kills dozens of baby boys trying to get to Jesus in the second half of chapter 2. All right? The reason he is extraordinarily evil is because Herod knows God is real. And he knows that the Bible is true, yet he still tries to overthrow God's Messiah. Now, why would he do such a thing? Well, it's because this new king threatened the centre of his existence. There's a theologian in the States by the name of Thomas Oden, and he tells us that every single human on the planet is goal-orientated. He says you cannot live, according to Oden, unless you have something to live for, unless you have something to strive for. The problem is all our individual goals compete with one another. And what this means is we need to choose one goal that sits at the centre of our existence to which all our other goals submit to. Okay? And so we all have this one goal that all our other goals serve. But here's the thing, that doesn't quite explain Herod. Oden goes on to say one more thing. He says, if we choose a finite goal, an earthly goal, as the centre of our existence, we will always be anxious. Right? He says this, quote, if the centre of my value is my health, or my political party, or my sexual attractiveness, or my financial productivity, when these things come under threat, and they always are if you think about it, he says, you will be shaken to your very depths. And this is what goes wrong with Herod. The central value of his life was power, was being king. And the news of a rival king being born threatened that power. And so in his insane anxiety, all right, he not only killed dozens of baby boys in and around Bethlehem, like we said in the following passage, but he also tried to kill the Lord's anointed. Now, before we condemn Herod and move on, it's important to realise that you and I have the exact same tendencies as Herod. Now, because we all have this one goal that lies at the centre of our existence. The difference between us and Herod is we don't react as violently as Herod did when our central goal in life is threatened, but make no mistake, we do react. Right? The number one reason people reject Jesus today is because they think Jesus is going to threaten their central value. But here's the thing. If the central value of your life is something earthly like power or influence, or career or status, or money or possessions, or marriage or kids, these things are always going to be under threat, whether you have Jesus in your life or not. So rejecting Jesus as king because he doesn't fit anxiety and irrational behaviour, as you ward off those ever-present threats to our central value in life. But now for the good news. Good news is this passage shows us an alternative to a life of anxiety and irrationality, and it's seen in our final response, and that's in verse 11. We read, "On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him." Now, what does it mean to bow down and worship? Well, it means declaring that you are high and mighty, and I am poor and lowly. All right, it's saying that this person or this thing, whatever it is that you worship, is worthy of my adoration, worthy of my obedience, worthy of my everything. Frankincense and myrrh. Now, why did they give Jesus these expensive gifts? Was it because they thought baby Jesus needed them? Well, friends, I submit to you that if a foreign dignitary visits a new royal baby today and brings royal care packages, you know what I mean, that foreign dignitary is actually dishonouring the royal family. Like, do you really think God's son needs these gifts? As if God can't look after the financial needs of his son. No. The reason they give these sacrificial gifts is because they're saying, I'm not coming to you to get some blessing from you. I'm coming to get you. I'm not here for riches. I'm here for you. And so I'm giving you that which you don't need and which I could use if I kept to declare that you are the central value of my life and not money or possessions. Now, friends, the million-dollar question is, why is Jesus worthy of this kind of worship? All right, why is he worthy to be our central goal or value in life? Well, it's really simple. It's because Jesus was willing to give up his central value for us. See, according to the Bible, Jesus has been in a perfect, loving relationship with God the Father for all eternity. Now, let's think about that for a second. So what does it mean to be in a perfectly loving, other person-centered relationship? It's actually beyond human capacity to fathom. The reason being, we're sinful creatures. We're incapable of actually doing that. We've got too much sin, too much selfishness in it. But that's what God the Father and God the Son have. But more importantly, they've had that for all eternity. Now, you and I have trouble fathoming being alive for 1,000 years. What about 1,000,000,000 billion trillion years? All right, in the Marvel comics, there is a race of beings known as the Celestials who have been alive for millions of years. And if we sat and thought about just that, it would boggle our minds. But multiply that by 1,000,000,000 trillion gazillion, and you're starting to get close to how long God has been around. Now, why did Jesus do that? Why did Jesus give up his most central and precious treasure? Well, it's because the punishment for rejecting God is being rejected by God. You and I, if we spend our whole lives ignoring and rejecting God, when we stand before him, which every person will, whether you believe in him or not, he will reject you. The reason Jesus came was to take that punishment for our rejection upon himself, so that we don't have to anymore. And herein lies the advantage of worshipping Jesus as our central value, our central treasure. You see, if Jesus has gone to that length for you, if Jesus has paid that high a price for you, then you can be certain he's not going to let you go. You're way too precious to him. So while worldly things like fame and fortune and sex and success and those kinds of things, they can be threatened, they can be taken from us, God can't. You cannot threaten to take God away from a person once he is in their kingdom. And herein lies the main message of this passage. It's not that God sent a star to 3 wise men who brought Jesus expensive gifts. It's that Jesus used these foreign fools to show us where real wisdom is found. All right? It is found in worshipping King Jesus, making Jesus the central value of your life. And so, friends, if you build your life on King Jesus, nothing can shake you. So how will you respond to King Jesus this Christmas?